Hello, thank you for joining me. My name is Nigel Bridges and I'm CEO and co-founder of Beacon. Very briefly, what we do at Beacon is help our clients to analyse and improve their digital marketing campaigns based on accurate, transparent and verifiably true data.
Today, based on real data and examples, I want to talk about the good, the bad, and the, shall we say, not entirely accurate in online advertising.
As I'm sure we're all aware, the world of online promotion can seem a little like the Wild West. You start the day with your pocket full of dollars, and by the time the day is over, most of them are missing, and you've no real idea where they've gone. You certainly don't have much to show for it. I don't know if you ever get that feeling, but certainly with my experience in this industry and spending money with names that you will be familiar with, I always had that feeling that something wasn't quite right, that I was being taken for granted and that my money was simply being wasted and not being used to the greatest effect. Now, we'll all be familiar with that often quoted phrase from John Wanamaker that 50% of my advertising is wasted. I just don't know which 50%. In the world of digital, it's even worse than that. Far more than 50% of the money that we spend online gets wasted and we never get a return. So I want to spend some time today going through some of the key issues that I see around the industry and look at the impact of this scandal. I'll then finish with some tips that you can follow in order to reduce your losses and maximize the engagement that we're all looking for from our target audience. So let's begin by looking at this fraudulent world of fake clicks. Fake news has been a headline now for a couple of years. But the problem of fake clicks goes back long before that, and it's getting worse. According to many different research papers, ad fraud accounts for billions of dollars of wasted advertising every year. You can see here on this slide just one paper that was published a little while ago that tried to quantify the size of ad fraud. One of the findings from this paper was that ad fraud is now the second largest category of fraud-based crime after financial crime. Many commentators in the industry are aware of this problem. I've put one up here, a quote from Anthony Hitchens from the Financial Times. He said this a little while ago: "The scale of the fraud we found is jaw-dropping. The industry continues to waste marketing budgets in what is essentially organised crime." So to put it bluntly, our advertising dollars are not only being wasted, but they're often being siphoned off to pay for things like drug trafficking, human trafficking, other areas of organised crime. The Drum last year took a look at this problem and they suggested that somewhere between 5% and 50% of online spend goes to ad fraud. Now that's a pretty wide margin. But if you think about that for a second, if the average is 25% and you apply that to your budget, how much of your budget is being wasted purely on ad fraud and fake clicks? If you simply take that number and applied it to the world of banner advertising and programmatic, then you get an estimated $30 billion of waste in 2020. That's effectively 21 trillion ads that we're paying for and that are never ever seen by a human being. That is simply scandalous. It's not just a huge waste of money, resources, assets and effort. It's also a tragedy when you realise where some of that cash is going. So that's problem number one: fake clicks, ad fraud. Now let's have a look at where this takes us. That's the ugly world of transparency, or rather the lack of. See, it's all very well some of our ad dollars simply being siphoned off, never ever to appear in an advert at all. That problem is compounded when we pay for adverts and yet the channels themselves tell us that those adverts are being effective when we know they're not. There was an excellent column in the Sunday Times a few months ago. It was Peter Evans, one of their columnists, with an interview with the CEO of Mama Foods, who, like us, spends marketing budget with Facebook. This article began to get to the root of the problem, and you can see the quotation here. Using the sites to advertise feels a little bit like a punt because of the control exerted by Silicon Valley giants over the true impact of advertising on their platforms. The only information you get back is direct from Facebook, and when you challenge them, they're not really up for sharing or explaining it. You see, that illustrates my second point, transparency. If I could sum it up, it would be this. When we spend money on adverts on a channel like Facebook or Google, for example, how do we know that our money is resulting in real human beings clicking on those adverts and being really engaged? The reality is that most of the analytics tools simply take data from those channels themselves. They slice and dice that data, they make it look pretty in graphs and pie charts, and then they present it to us as fact. But the problem is, those underlying numbers are not always reliable. In the words of the previous ad tech director of the Washington Post, they might just be fake. From our own findings, we know that's true. Can we trust the numbers that come from the channels? My view is, I'm afraid to say, not always. So now let's have a look at our third area, the world of measurement, and how we can start to measure the right things. You see, it's one thing to get the data. We're all drowning in a sea of data. It's quite another thing to get true, accurate, transparent data that we can easily understand and act upon. Forgive me for a few moments, but I'm going to put a slide up that's got quite a lot of information on it to illustrate my point. The data you're looking at here is a mixture of the data from an ad channel and the data that is independently verified outside of that channel. So let me explain the context. This was a banner campaign in a regional newspaper. That newspaper had persuaded the advertiser that they should spend some money on an advertising campaign through some banner ads that would drive people to click through to a landing page to sign up to receive some information. Firstly, let me draw your attention to the numbers down the bottom left. This was a trial campaign. The newspapers persuaded the advertiser to spend £1,000 to get 40,000 impressions. I'm sure we've all done that. Now let's look at the reality of what happened. Look at the numbers at the top left-hand corner. That £1,000 and those 40,000 impressions drove 205 clicks through to the target website. However, on analysing each of those clicks, what we notice is that 179 of those clicks were not human beings at all. They were bots, leaving just 26 human clicks. Now draw your gaze to the top right. What you see here is a measurement of engagement and a measure of the final result. Engagement effectively means more than a hard bounce. So in other words, the visitor clicked through onto the advert on the landing page, then started to engage with that landing page. They started to actually look at the content. You will see a grand total here of 1 engaged visitor, sadly resulting in 0 requests for information. So the advertiser went back to the newspaper to challenge them on the results. The first reaction was, no, that can't possibly be true. The campaign was rerun for free, and the results were very similar. That resulted in the following quote from the digital sales director at the newspaper. "I'm sorry it didn't work out, but this is how marketing is. Sometimes it hits the spot, sometimes it falls on stony ground." Well, I don't know about you, but I simply think that that's outrageous. In this day and age, when we can analyse what is truly happening on websites, when we can analyse the difference between a human click and a non-human click, we can't allow, as an industry, to get away with dismissive attitudes like this. For a customer to spend money and to be promised lots of impressions is one thing. But when that effort results in 1 engaged human visitor and 0 real business results, then our attitude should not be one of shrugging our shoulders and simply saying, that's just too bad, that's how it is. Let me show you the real impact this is having on budgets. What I'm about to show you are the results of a campaign that we ourselves did a little while ago. we decided we would spend some money on some paid ads across 5 different platforms and measure the comparative results of those platforms and the number of bot clicks versus human clicks for each of them. Now, it's a relatively small experiment, but it'll illustrate the point nicely. The first slide shows you the spread of the clicks. On the left, you'll see the total. There were just over 200 clicks. That's what we paid for. And then we turned them off when we hit 200. Then across the page, you'll see the distribution of those clicks across each of the channels. Now, let me be clear here. Different content, different audiences, different geographies, different times obviously suit different channels. We should always use the most appropriate channel for the message and for the audience. Nevertheless, this does illustrate the points that I made earlier. You can see that we had 30 clicks on Reddit, just over 50 through Google, 6 on Twitter, 46 on LinkedIn, 74 on Facebook. Now, if those were my results from yesterday, where would I spend my money today? Based on these clicks, I'd probably spend my money on Facebook, possibly also on Google, because those are the ones that gave me the most clicks. Now, let's have a look at what actually happened. You can see here the red line represents human visitors. In other words, about 50% of the overall clicks were not human, even though we paid for them all. The orange bar is the number of those human visitors who were then engaged with the content. Not necessarily downloading anything or buying anything, but simply staying on that landing page and moving around it and engaging with some of the content. You can see here we had 30 engaged visitors. So that's about 15% of the total clicks. Now that's fairly insightful in itself. And it supports what we looked at just now, which is half of our clicks are completely wasted on bots and about 15% of those clicks resulted in engaged human beings. Now let's have a look at what happened across the individual platforms. What you see here is the distribution across those 5 different platforms and how much it varies per platform. So for example, Reddit gave us 30 clicks, of whom 24 were human and 11 were engaged. That was a good result. Compare that with Facebook, who gave us 74 clicks, of whom only 12 were human. In other words, 62 were bots that we paid for, and only one of those humans was engaged. Now, obviously, the engagement and the results would vary depending on your campaign and your channel and your geography and even on the time of day. So please don't take these results as being definitive for those channels, but it does show you that by understanding the real data around human visitors and human engagement, we would probably spend our budget differently than just looking at the clicks, for example. So to put this into financial terms, this graph shows us the cost per click, the cost for a human visitor, and the cost for an engaged human visitor for each of those channels. And you'll see here the overall cost per click was about £1. The cost for a human visitor was £2, and the cost for an engaged human visitor was £7. But as you can see, the variance by channel is huge. And once you understand those 3 metrics for each channel, you can then make intelligent decisions about where to deploy your budget. What are the best channels for your campaign to get maximum engagement? Let me give you one more example before we move on to some conclusions. This customer spends approximately £150,000 per month. That's not untypical for his industry. He's a retailer reaching out with a B2C proposition. We examined in detail what actually happened to 12 of those ads. Now, on the surface, those 12 ads resulted in just over 60,000 clicks, and the average cost per click was 41 pence. Now let's look and see what really happened. The big red bar here is the number reported by the ad network. The blue line is the number that we measured independently, and you'll see that of the 60,000 clicks, 42% of those clicks never arrived at the target end URL. They simply went missing. The next block are the bot clicks, and you'll see that 12% of those 60,000 clicks arrived at the target website, but the clicker wasn't a human being at all, but was a bot. In other words, we paid for an advert that was clicked on by a bot that's never ever going to buy. So yet again, we see that in this case, just under 50% of those clicks were human and just over 50% of those clicks were not human. So I hope you can see a theme emerging here. So let's look at the financials behind this. Because different clicks cost a different amount of money, then obviously the percentages are going to be different. You can see here that those missing clicks accounted for 17% of the overall budget. So not as horrific as 42%, but 17% of a large number is still a large number that's wasted. A further 15% of the budget was spent on adverts that resulted in non-human clicks. Again, 15% of a large budget is still a large number. And therefore, only 68% of the overall budget for those ads resulted in human beings clicking on those ads and going through to the website. So if you want a rough rule of thumb for search and social advertising in this case, then here is the true cost of engagement. If your average cost per click is £1, then your average cost for a human visitor will be around £2, and your average cost for an engaged human visitor will be around £7. Now, those are averages. But in the 12 months or so that we've been doing an analysis in this area, we find consistently a 7x multiplier across all of our campaigns. So as I wrap up, what I'd like to do is look at the environment we find ourselves in with COVID and then give you some tips that we've learned along the way that I hope you'll find useful. After all, our mission collectively must be to minimise our waste and maximise the engagement. So let's have a look. What we're seeing in these COVID times are two opposite forces colliding. On the one hand, we're observing an accelerating growth towards online. I'm sure we've all seen it. Those who are currently online are spending more. Those who weren't previously online are rushing online to maintain or increase their market share. So organisations know they have to spend more money online. However, given what I've spoken about already, we know that online advertising involves cost and involves losses. And the harsh reality is, the more you spend online, the more you're going to waste online. Which, of course, gives us budget holders a headache. So the simple question is this: if I could cut through the fake, through the noise, through the false metrics, so that I knew what really worked and what didn't, I'd spend more money on what worked and less money on what didn't. So here are some ways that we have found to help reduce waste. Firstly, it's imperative that you understand the impact of click fraud on all of your campaigns in detail. It'll be much larger than you think it is. Secondly, make sure you're measuring the right things. I'm sure impressions have their use, but ultimately you should be measuring business metrics. For example, if you're an online retailer, ultimately the only thing that counts is selling more to your customers. A click must lead to an engaged human visitor that leads to a sale. Measuring those three at the ad level, the campaign level, the channel level, you see, you need to understand the true cost per ad, the true revenue per ad, the true revenue per channel or per campaign, so that you can do genuine ROI calculations. Thirdly, use independent, transparent data. Don't just use the data that the channels give you. And be wary of the analytics tools that simply suck in the channel data, slice it, dice it, and display it back to you. We know that that channel data is not as accurate as it should be. Fourthly, make sure you compare apples with apples. Different channels use different metrics for success. Compare ROI with ROI across your different channels and ads and posts and links.
It may well be that email is the best outreach tool for you and your campaign, but your usual channel might not tell you that.
Now, we've talked quite a lot about bots. It's one thing knowing that a bot has hit your site. Ideally, you want to stop that bot before you get charged for it. So try to stop as many bots as you can before they waste your budget. Bots are very, very clever things. And it's a constant war of attrition to keep them out. But please use software that will stop those bots before they take money out of your wallet. However, bots will always get through. As I've just said, they're clever. So you'll always get a percentage of bots getting through, even through the strongest of shields. So compile your evidence. Make sure you can prove that a click was definitely a bot. Then go back to the ad channels, demand your money back. Now, I have to say, some of them will listen, some of them won't. But if collectively we can all demand money back from the provable fake clicks, it might just move the needle with some of the channels. And my final tip, constantly measure and refine your campaigns. Not just at the end of a week or a month, but hourly if necessary. Use proper tools that tell you clearly and simply the reality of what's going on. You can then modify and improve your campaigns to increase your ROI and decrease your waste. The sand is constantly shifting. You need to be on top of that shifting sand. So I realise I've covered a lot of ground in this talk. I do hope there's been some items of interest for you here. I'm very happy to take any comments or questions or engage in a dialogue in any of this, so please do reach out to me. Let me finish by thanking you very much for watching. My name is Nigel Bridges, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Beacon Digital Campaign Intelligence.
Today, based on real data and examples, I want to talk about the good, the bad, and the, shall we say, not entirely accurate in online advertising. Fourthly, make sure you compare apples with apples. Different channels use different metrics for success. So compare ROI with ROI across your different channels and ads and posts and links. Fourthly, make sure you compare apples with apples. Different channels use different metrics for success. Compare ROI with ROI across your different channels and ads and posts and links. It may well be that email is the best outreach tool for you and your campaign, but your usual channel may not tell you that.